The light from 1,000 crystals sparkled overhead as waiters in black tie weaved expertly through Boston's elite. My father's 80th birthday celebration was exactly what he'd always valued: excessive, exclusive, and calculated to impress. I smoothed the wrinkles from my modest navy dress, the nicest thing in my wardrobe, but painfully understated among the designer gowns and heirloom jewelry adorning the other guests. The subtle scent of my mother's favorite perfume, the only luxury I permitted myself, felt like a shield against the suffocating cloud of wealth that hung in the air. "Catherine, you actually showed up." My sister Victoria air-kissed near my cheek, close enough that I caught the scent of expensive bourbon on her breath. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she pulled back to examine me with barely concealed disappointment. "We didn't think you'd make an appearance. Did Melissa convince you?" "Hello to you too, Victoria," I said, taking a reluctant sip of champagne that tasted too sweet against my dry throat. "Yes, my daughter believes in family obligations, even when they're uncomfortable." Melissa appeared at my side, squeezing my arm in silent support. At 33, she navigated these waters with more grace than I ever had, her natural warmth creating a small buffer against the cold calculation that permeated the Blackwood family gatherings. "Grandfather's about to give his speech," she whispered. The room quieted as my father took center stage, leaning slightly on a polished ebony cane that looked more like a prop than a necessity. At 80, Walter Blackwood remained an imposing figure, 6 feet of sharp angles and cold determination. His silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit hanging impeccably from shoulders that refused to bow with age. "Thank you all for celebrating this milestone with me," he began, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had closed billion-dollar deals and crushed countless competitors. "A man's 80th year gives him perspective on what truly matters: legacy." The word hung in the air like a judgment. I felt my stomach tighten. "I've built an empire worth fighting for, worth preserving," he continued, sweeping his gaze across the room before settling it on my brother Alexander and sister Victoria, who stood taller under his attention. "And I'm blessed with children who understood the value of what I created." A server passed with a tray of champagne, and I reached for another glass, needing something to occupy my hands. "Alexander, Victoria, come join me." My siblings moved forward like courtiers approaching a king. These two have expanded the Blackwood legacy beyond my wildest dreams. They understood sacrifice, ambition, vision. My father's voice swelled with pride. "Which is why today I'm announcing the division of my estate, approximately $39 million in properties, vessels, investments, and liquid assets, between them." Applause rippled through the crowd. I remained still, my face carefully neutral despite the familiar sting. Melissa's hand found mine and squeezed. "Don't worry, Mom," she whispered. "We never expected anything." But my father wasn't finished. He raised a hand to quiet the room, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. "And then there's Catherine." His use of my full name sliced through the air like a blade. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The chandelier light suddenly felt harsh, exposing. "My firstborn," he continued, his tone shifting to something between amusement and contempt. "Who chose poetry over profit, idealism over achievement." He lifted his glass toward me in a mocking toast. "Who has spent 6 decades proving that she never understood the first thing about success or legacy." The silence in the room was absolute. "Catherine," he said, looking directly at me now, "you never deserved anything from this family, and that's exactly what you'll receive." Laughter rippled through the crowd, uncomfortable at first, then growing as my siblings' loud guffaws gave others permission to join in. The sound surrounded me like rising floodwater. I set my untouched champagne on a nearby table and straightened my spine. 60 years of his dismissal had taught me one thing: how to exit with dignity. "Melissa, I'm leaving," I whispered. "Stay if you want." "Mom, no." But I was already moving through the crowd, which parted around me like I carried something contagious. The marble floor felt endless beneath my sensible heels. Outside, the crisp October air was a blessing against my flushed skin. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of autumn leaves instead of expensive cologne and judgment. My hands trembled slightly as I fumbled for my car keys in the dimly lit parking area. "Professor Blackwood?" I turned to find an elderly man standing a few feet away, his weathered face vaguely familiar. "I'm Thomas Edwards," he said, his voice gentle but urgent. "I was your mother's attorney and friend." The name unlocked dusty memories. A kind man who'd visited our home occasionally when I was young, who'd attended my mother's funeral 30 years ago. "Mr. Edwards, it's been a long time." He nodded, glancing back toward the mansion. "I've been waiting for this day for 3 decades, though I'd hoped it wouldn't come." From his coat, he withdrew a thick envelope, yellowed with age, my name written across the front in my mother's elegant handwriting. "Your mother asked me to give you this if your father ever did what he just did in there." His eyes held a mixture of sadness and anticipation. "She made me promise." My fingers trembled as I took the envelope, the paper cool and heavy in my hands. "Thank you," I whispered, unsure what else to say. "Read it tonight," he said, pressing a business card into my palm. "Call me tomorrow." In the safety of my car, beneath the glow of the interior light, I broke the wax seal my mother had pressed into place 30 years before. The scent of her, faint but unmistakable, rose from the pages as I unfolded the letter. The first line stole my breath. "My darling Catherine, if you're reading this, it means your father finally did what I always feared. He tried to steal not just your birthright, but your dignity. Now it's time for you to learn the truth about everything." I read the letter 3 times that night, each reading revealing layers I'd missed before. My hands shook as I spread the accompanying documents across my kitchen table. Legal papers, bank statements, and old photographs that painted a picture so different from the family history I'd accepted my entire life. "Your father built his empire on deception," my mother wrote. "The initial capital came from my family, not his shipping ventures, as he's always claimed. When we married, he systematically transferred my inheritance into his name, not through force, but through my naive trust." Outside my window, rain began to patter against the glass, a gentle counterpoint to the thunder in my chest. My modest 2-bedroom colonial in Cambridge felt suddenly very small, as if the weight of these revelations was pressing the walls inward. "What you never knew, Catherine, is that I stopped trusting him years before my diagnosis. I knew what he would do to you once I was gone, how he would punish you for being like me, for valuing knowledge over power, compassion over conquest." I poured myself a glass of wine, my throat dry. Eleanor Blackwood, the quiet, refined woman who had taught me poetry and taken me to museums while my siblings toured construction sites with our father, had been playing a long game I never suspected. Working with Thomas, I've created a separate holding company under the name Nightingale Ventures. Through this entity, I've acquired approximately 15% of Blackwood Enterprises' founding shares. I used money from my grandmother's trust that Walter never knew existed. The accompanying statements showed that over 3 decades, those investments had grown exponentially. The value now was staggering, nearly triple what my father had so proudly announced he was giving my siblings. Additionally, I've established a separate trust in your name, held by Atlantic Trust Bank in the Cayman Islands. The initial deposit was modest enough to avoid Walter's notice, but with Thomas's careful management, it should provide you with security regardless of what your father does. According to the most recent statement, modest had become $22 million. My teacup clattered against its saucer. All these years living on a professor's salary, careful budgeting, modest vacations, while unknown to me, I had access to a fortune. While my siblings flaunted their wealth, I'd lived simply, believing it was my only option. I don't expect you to use this to seek revenge, Catherine. Revenge consumes the soul, but justice heals. Thomas knows all the details and will guide you. Trust him as I have. The letter ended with what broke me completely. "I've watched you grow into a woman of profound integrity, Catherine. You chose a path of meaning rather than wealth, of contribution rather than accumulation. I couldn't be prouder. Use this unexpected power wisely. It's not about the money, it's about the truth. And truth, my darling, is the ultimate legacy." Her signature, elegant, decisive, blurred beneath my tears. Dawn found me still at the kitchen table, the documents organized into neat piles, my mind racing with possibilities. The professor in me had taken over, analyzing, questioning, planning. By the time Melissa called to check on me, I had composed myself. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice carried the weight of last night's humiliation. "Actually, yes," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Something Unexpected happened. "I'm coming over," she said immediately. When Melissa arrived, dressed in scrubs from her morning hospital rounds, her face was tight with concern. I made coffee while she glanced curiously at the piles of documents on the table. "What's all this?" she asked. I handed her a mug and sat down. "Your grandmother left me a letter. It seems I'm not as destitute as your grandfather would have everyone believe." I explained everything: the holdings, the trust, the shares. Melissa's expression shifted from concern to astonishment. "Mom, this makes you one of the major shareholders in Blackwood Enterprises," she said, her medical precision quickly calculating implications. "You could actually influence company decisions." "Apparently, I already have been, anonymously. According to Thomas, my mother's holding company has occasionally blocked some of Dad's more ethically questionable moves over the years. He never knew who was behind it." Melissa set down her coffee. "What are you going to do?" The question hung between us. The obvious answer, immediate confrontation, a triumphant revelation, flickered temptingly. "Nothing. Not yet," I said, surprising both of us. "First, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." "You're not going to tell them?" Melissa looked shocked. "Knowledge is power, sweetie. Right now, I have knowledge they don't. The moment I reveal it, the dynamics shift." My phone rang. Thomas Edwards. I put him on speaker. "Did you read everything?" he asked without preamble. "Yes. It's overwhelming." "There's more," he said gravely. "Blackwood Enterprises is facing a major crisis. The Boston Globe is preparing an exposé on corruption in government construction contracts. Your father and siblings are implicated." Melissa's eyes widened. I felt the ground shift beneath me again. "How bad?" I asked. "Potentially criminal. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Your father doesn't know it yet, but Nightingale's approval will be required for their damage control strategy." "And Nightingale is me," I whispered. "Precisely." After hanging up, Melissa stared at me. "Mom, this is bigger than personal justice now. People could be hurt if the company collapses. Thousands of employees, pensioners." Her concern for strangers, even in the midst of our family drama, made my heart swell with pride. This was my daughter, compassionate, ethical, practical. Everything I'd tried to be, everything my mother had valued. "You're right," I said. "This isn't just about settling scores. It's about responsibility." I gathered the documents into my briefcase, the one I'd carried to university lectures for 20 years, and made a decision. "I need a suit," I said simply. "Something appropriate for a board meeting." Thomas met me at Neiman Marcus the following morning. It felt surreal to have the elderly attorney trailing behind me as a personal shopper guided us through racks of designer clothing. "Too flashy," Thomas commented on a brightly colored suit. "You want authority, not attention." We settled on a charcoal gray Armani with subtle pinstripes. Classic, understated power. The price tag made me wince despite my newfound wealth. "Think of it as armor," Thomas said, noting my hesitation. In the fitting room, I stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized looking back at me. My silver-streaked brown hair, usually in a simple bob, was freshly styled. The suit fit perfectly, emphasizing a quiet dignity I'd always possessed but rarely showcased. "Eleanor would be proud," Thomas said when I emerged. "You look like what you are, a major shareholder." Over lunch, in a quiet corner of the store's restaurant, Thomas briefed me on what we knew about the scandal. His network of contacts had provided disturbing details. The Globe has evidence that Blackwood Enterprises systematically bribed officials to secure government contracts for the Harborfront Renewal Project. They overpaid for materials, then kicked back the difference to shell companies owned by your brother and sister. "And my father?" I asked. "Approved everything. There are emails." Thomas passed me his tablet, displaying messages between Walter, Alexander, and Victoria, discussing what they called cost adjustments. "They could go to prison," I whispered, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "The company could collapse entirely," Thomas added, "which would mean thousands of innocent employees would lose their jobs and pensions," I finished, "not to mention the impact on the city if the Harborfront project fails." We spent the afternoon in Thomas's office, reviewing financial statements, corporate bylaws, and legal precedents. By evening, I felt as prepared as I could be, though sleep proved elusive that night. I kept seeing my father's contemptuous face as he publicly humiliated me, juxtaposed with the faces of nameless employees whose livelihoods hung in the balance. The Blackwood Enterprises headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. I'd visited only twice before, once for the building's opening ceremony when I was in college, and years later for a strained lunch with my father when Melissa was applying to medical schools. Both times I'd felt like an intruder. Today was different. I entered through the revolving glass doors with purpose, Thomas at my side. The security guard checked our IDs, his eyebrows rising slightly at my name. "You're Mr. Blackwood's daughter?" "I am," I replied simply. The executive elevator whisked us to the 45th floor. Thomas had timed our arrival precisely, late enough that the meeting would be about to begin, but not so late that they could reasonably exclude us. "Remember," Thomas said quietly as the elevator ascended, "you don't need to reveal everything at once. Listen first. Understand their strategy." The boardroom doors were imposing, heavy walnut with the Blackwood Enterprises logo inlaid in brass. I could hear voices inside, my father's distinctive bark rising above the others. Thomas nodded encouragingly. I straightened my spine, thought of my mother, and opened the doors. The conversation stopped abruptly. 14 faces turned toward us, expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. My father, at the head of the table, froze mid-sentence. Alexander and Victoria, flanking him like sentinels, looked as if they'd seen a ghost. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Please continue." "Catherine?" My father recovered first, his tone incredulous. "What do you think you're doing?" "Attending the emergency board meeting," I replied, moving to an empty chair near the middle of the table. Thomas took the seat beside me. "This is a closed meeting," Alexander snapped, "for board members and legal counsel only." "I am aware," I said, opening my briefcase and removing a slim folder. "Thomas Edwards, my attorney, and I believe you'll find I have every right to be here." The company's lead counsel, Diane Sullivan, a sharp-featured woman I recognized from charity events, frowned. "Ms. Blackwood, with all due respect—" "Professor Blackwood," I corrected gently. "Professor Blackwood," she amended. "This meeting concerns highly sensitive corporate matters. The Harborfront Project corruption investigation," I said. "Yes, I'm aware." The room went deadly silent. My father's face darkened dangerously. "How exactly do you know about that?" Victoria demanded, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather portfolio before her. Instead of answering, I slid my folder toward Diane. "I think you should verify these documents, Ms. Sullivan." She opened the folder warily, scanning the contents with professional efficiency. I watched her expression change. Confusion, then shock, then something approaching respect. "Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully, "it appears your daughter is the beneficial owner of Nightingale Ventures." A strangled sound escaped Alexander's throat. "That's impossible," my father said. "Nightingale is a 15% stakeholder in Blackwood Enterprises," Diane finished. "And according to the corporate bylaws, any defensive strategy regarding potential criminal investigations requires a supermajority vote, which necessitates Nightingale's approval." My father's face had gone from red to ashen. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I'd never witnessed before. Fear. "Hello, Dad," I said quietly. "I believe we need to talk about the future of our family business." "You have no right," he began, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "I have every right," I corrected him. Mother made sure of that. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Eleanor," he whispered, and in that single word, I heard 30 years of secrets beginning to unravel. "This is preposterous," Alexander sputtered, recovering first. "Some ancient paperwork doesn't make you qualified to—" "Alexander," Diane cut in sharply, "these documents are entirely legitimate." She looked at me with new eyes. "Professor Blackwood is legally entitled to representation in this meeting." My father's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. I pretended not to notice. "I'd like to understand the situation we're facing," I said evenly, addressing Diane rather than my family members. "The full situation, please." The corporate attorney hesitated, glancing at my father. "Ms. Sullivan," I said quietly, "I own 15% of this company. That makes me your client too." She nodded, professional mask firmly back in place. "The Boston Globe has obtained documents suggesting improprieties in the Harborfront Project bidding process. They're preparing a story alleging that Blackwood Enterprises secured contracts through payments to city officials, facilitated through artificially inflated subcontractor invoices. How did they get these documents? I asked. We believe a former employee in accounting, Diane replied. Whistleblower, I corrected gently. The term is whistleblower. My brother's face flushed angrily. If you're here to moralize, I'm here to understand, I interrupted, and to help, if possible. I turned back to Diane. What's our exposure? Substantial, she admitted. Both financial and criminal. The evidence is compelling. Thomas cleared his throat. And the proposed strategy? Diane slid several documents across the table. The board was about to vote on a three-pronged approach: legal containment, strategic divestiture of the Harborfront project to a friendly third party, and scapegoating, Thomas said, scanning the papers. You're planning to pin everything on the project manager. Robert worked for us for 20 years, I said, remembering the kind man who'd always greeted me warmly on my rare visits to the company. He has 3 children and a wife with multiple sclerosis. Business isn't about sentimentality, my father growled, finding his voice at last. No, I agreed, but it should be about integrity. The room fell silent again. I allowed myself a moment to absorb the scene. My powerful father suddenly diminished, my siblings seething with confusion and resentment, the board members watching this family drama unfold with professional detachment masking obvious fascination. What do you propose instead? Diane asked, her tone carefully neutral. Before I could answer, Victoria's brittle laugh cut through the tension. She hasn't set foot in this building in years. She teaches poetry to undergrads. What could she possibly know about saving a company from scandal? I smiled at my sister. I teach literature, Victoria, ethics, consequences, the long arc of human actions. It's actually quite relevant. I stood up and walked to the window. From 45 floors up, Boston spread before me. The harbor, the historic buildings, the neighborhoods where real people lived and worked, people who would be affected by what happened in this room. The strategy you've outlined is short-sighted, I said, turning back to face the board. It might contain the immediate damage, but it sacrifices long-term trust. It protects individuals at the expense of the institution. And you have a better idea? Alexander sneered. Yes, I said simply. Transparency, accountability, restitution. That's not a strategy, my father barked. That's suicide. Actually, Thomas interjected, opening his laptop, we've prepared an alternative approach. He distributed folders to each board member. The Blackwood Restoration Plan. I watched their faces as they reviewed our proposal, developed during yesterday's marathon session with Thomas's team. Skepticism gave way to reluctant consideration as they processed our approach, admitting wrongdoing, cooperating with authorities, establishing an ethics oversight committee, making restitution to the city, and protecting projects, jobs, and pensions. This is absurd, my father finally said, slamming his folder closed. You want us to fall on our swords. I want us to save the company, I corrected him. And yes, that means taking responsibility. Us? Victoria repeated incredulously. Suddenly it's us? It's always been us, Victoria. I just wasn't invited to the table. I met her gaze steadily. But I'm here now. Diane broke the standoff. Mr. Blackwood, legally speaking, we cannot proceed without Professor Blackwood's approval. Given the evidence the Globe has, her approach actually offers significant advantages in terms of damage control and potential sentencing leniency. Sentencing? Alexander paled. Yes, Diane said bluntly. Criminal charges are likely regardless of our strategy. The question is whether we face them as individuals or as a company. My father pushed back his chair and stood, his imposing frame now somehow smaller. This meeting is adjourned. I need to consult privately with my legal team. The board needs to vote, Walter, Diane reminded him. Today, 4 hours, he countered. We reconvene at 3. As the board members filed out, my father remained seated, staring at the table. Alexander and Victoria hovered uncertainly beside him. When the room had emptied except for us, Thomas and Diane, my father finally looked up at me. 30 years, he said, his voice hollow. 30 years she's been orchestrating this from the grave. Mother wasn't orchestrating revenge, I said quietly. She was ensuring justice would be possible someday. Justice, he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his lips. Is that what this is? No, I said. gathering my materials. This is just the beginning. Thomas and I retreated to a small conference room down the hall. Through the glass walls, I watched executives hurry past, their expressions tense, whispering urgently into phones. News was spreading. "You did well," Thomas said, pouring us both water from a crystal carafe. "Eleanor would have been proud." "I don't feel proud," I admitted. "I feel sad. I knew my father was ruthless in business, but actual corruption? Criminal behavior? Did my mother know it would go this far?" Thomas shook his head. "Eleanor knew his character, not his future actions. She created a safeguard, not a prophecy." My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "How's it going?" I typed quickly. "Complicated. We'll explain tonight." "Professor Blackwood?" Diane appeared at the doorway. "Your father is asking to speak with you, privately." I found him in his office, a vast corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk the size of my dining room table. Glass cases displayed construction models of his most famous projects. Awards lined the walls, everything designed to intimidate. 30 years, he said without preamble as I entered. 30 years I've been wondering who was behind Nightingale. Some competitor, some financial shark. Never once did I imagine. He trailed off, staring out at the city skyline. "It wasn't me," I said. "It was Mother. Eleanor." He almost whispered her name. "She was always reading, always watching. I should have known she understood more than she let on." "She loved you," I said, surprising myself with the words. "At least in the beginning. She told me that in the letter." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw genuine confusion break through his carefully constructed facade. "Then why?" "Because she knew you would do exactly what you did at your birthday party. You would punish anyone who didn't mirror your values back to you." The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Blackwood, Alexander and Victoria are insisting—" "Send them in," he cut off his assistant. My siblings burst into the room, their faces twin masks of fury and fear. "The board is leaning toward Catherine's proposal," Alexander said without greeting. "Sullivan is convincing them it's the only way to minimize personal liability." "And you're just sitting here chatting?" Victoria added incredulously. "We're discussing your mother," my father replied, his voice unnaturally even. "Mother?" Victoria blinked. "What does she have to do with anything?" "Everything, apparently." He gestured toward me. "She set all this in motion before she died." Alexander looked at me as if truly seeing me for the first time. "You've been playing us." "No," I said. "I only learned about my shares 2 days ago, but now that I know, I intend to use them responsibly." "Responsibly?" Victoria's laugh was brittle. "By destroying everything we've built? By saving what can be saved," I corrected her. "The current path leads to indictments, prison sentences, and the company's collapse. My plan offers a way forward." "Your plan requires us to admit wrongdoing," Alexander shouted. "Because there was wrongdoing," I said quietly. "The question isn't whether the company survives, but what kind of company survives." My father had been watching this exchange with strange detachment. Now he spoke. "What exactly do you want, Catherine?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge? Validation? Justice? "I want to protect innocent employees from paying for mistakes they didn't make," I said finally. "I want to preserve what's good about this company while excising what's corrupt." "And us?" Victoria asked, her voice suddenly small. "Your plan throws us to the wolves." "No," I shook my head. "The wolves are already at the door. My plan gives you a chance to face consequences with dignity rather than disgrace." Before they could respond, Diane knocked and entered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a development. The Globe has moved up their publication timeline. The story runs tomorrow morning." Alexander swore loudly. Victoria sank into a chair. "We need the board's decision now," Diane continued. "The prosecutors have reached out for comment. We have 2 hours at most." My father's face hardened into the expression I'd seen countless times, the battle mask he wore when closing merciless deals. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I won't watch it disintegrate over some technical violations." "Dad," I said, the word feeling strange in my mouth after years of distance, "these aren't technical violations. People's trust was broken. Laws were violated. The only path forward is through accountability." "Easy for you to say," Alexander snapped. "You've got nothing to lose." I turned to him, really looking at my brother, the lines of strain around his eyes. the expensive watch that suddenly seemed like a shackle. "I have exactly as much to lose as you do now," I said. "But I'm offering a way to lose with honor rather than disgrace." The room fell silent. Finally, my father spoke, each word seeming to cost him. "Present your full proposal to the board. If they vote to accept it—" He paused, the effort visibly painful. "I won't stand in the way." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't even acceptance, but it was a crack in the wall that had separated us for decades, a tiny fissure through which, perhaps, some light might eventually penetrate. 3:00, I nodded and turned to leave, feeling the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on my back as the door closed behind me. The boardroom felt different when we reconvened, the air heavier, the faces graver. News travels quickly in corporate towers. Several board members who had barely acknowledged me earlier now offered tentative smiles as I entered with Thomas. "The Globe story runs tomorrow," Diane announced once everyone was seated. "We have one chance to get ahead of this." She nodded to me. "Professor Blackwood will present the comprehensive strategy her team has developed." I stood, acutely aware of my father's gaze as I distributed detailed copies of our proposal. Despite decades in university lecture halls, my throat felt dry. This wasn't literature. This was livelihoods. "The Blackwood Restoration Plan has 3 core components," I began. "First, transparent accountability. We publicly acknowledge the improprieties, cooperate fully with authorities, and implement a new ethics oversight committee with external members." Alexander's pen tapped an agitated rhythm against his leather portfolio. "Second, structural reform. We create a corporate governance firewall between the Blackwood family and contract procurement. All future government bids will undergo independent review." Victoria whispered something to my father, who silenced her with a subtle gesture. "Finally, and most importantly, we protect the workforce. No layoffs related to the Harborfront project. Pension funds remain untouched. The company absorbs the financial penalties." "And who absorbs the legal consequences?" asked James Westfield, a board member with silver hair and skeptical eyes. "Those responsible," I said simply. "The investigation will determine culpability. Our proposal includes resignation and full cooperation from anyone implicated in wrongdoing." "That could include most of senior management," Diane noted. "Yes," I acknowledged, "which is why the plan also includes a leadership transition framework." I paused, then added, "We face a choice between a controlled, principled restructuring or an uncontrolled collapse." The vote came faster than I expected. 10 in favor, 3 against, 1 abstention. My father didn't vote at all, his silence somehow louder than words. What followed was a whirlwind. Diane and Thomas huddled with PR teams to craft statements. I found myself in back-to-back meetings with legal teams, drafting language for press releases and regulatory disclosures. By 7 that evening, my voice had grown hoarse and my new suit was wrinkled. Melissa found me in the executive lounge, staring out at the harbor lights blinking on as dusk settled over Boston. "You look exhausted," she said, setting down a paper bag that smelled wonderfully of garlic and basil. "I brought dinner from Antonio's." "How did you get past security?" I asked, suddenly ravenous. "I told them I was Dr. Blackwood here to see Professor Blackwood." She smiled. "Technically accurate." As we ate pasta from takeout containers with plastic forks, I filled her in on the day's developments. "So essentially, you're saving the company from itself," she summarized. "Trying to," I corrected. "Tomorrow when the story breaks, it gets complicated." "Are you ready for what comes next?" Melissa asked, studying my face with the careful attention she'd give a patient. Before I could answer, my father appeared in the doorway. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, small dishevelments that on him seemed seismic. "I need a moment with your mother," he said to Melissa, his tone leaving no room for discussion. She squeezed my hand before gathering the food containers. "I'll be downstairs in the lobby," she told me quietly. When we were alone, my father poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the lounge bar without offering me any. The gesture was so familiar, his needs automatically prioritized, that I almost laughed. "The board accepted your plan," he said, his back to me. "Yes, tomorrow my name becomes synonymous with corruption." He turned, studying me over the rim of his glass. 30 years building a legacy, destroyed in a day. "Not destroyed," I corrected gently. "Recalibrated. The buildings will still stand. People will still have jobs. The Blackwood name will be associated with accountability instead of denial." He made a dismissive sound. Poetic nonsense. Perhaps, I conceded, but sometimes poetry contains more truth than balance sheets. He drained his glass, set it down with deliberate care. Eleanor always said you were the wisest of my children. I thought she meant the softest. They aren't mutually exclusive. His eyes, so like mine, searched my face. Did she ever tell you why I built all this? Why it mattered so much? To prove something to your father, I said. The man who said you'd never amount to anything. Surprise flickered across his features. She told you that? No, I said softly. I worked it out for myself. Why else would you repeat the same pattern with me? He flinched as if I'd struck him. For a moment, I glimpsed something raw beneath the imperious facade, a wounded core that had been driving him for decades. The statement goes out at 9 tomorrow morning, I said, gathering my things. Diane will coordinate with legal. The board expects your resignation by noon. And Alexander? Victoria? He asked. That depends on what the investigation reveals about their level of involvement, I replied. But yes, leadership changes will be necessary. He nodded once, a general acknowledging tactical defeat. You won this round, Catherine. This isn't about winning, I said, suddenly tired beyond words. It's about stopping a cycle that hurts everyone involved. As I walked toward the door, he spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Your mother, in the end, did she hate me? I paused, remembering Eleanor's final words in her letter. Even after everything, I never stopped believing in the man I thought he could become. No, I said truthfully. She never hated you. She just loved truth more. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning, painting the Cambridge sky in shades of lavender and gold. I stood at my kitchen window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the newspaper delivery car make its methodical rounds. The driver tossed bundled papers onto driveways with practiced precision, unaware that today's edition would shatter countless lives, including those of my own family. In homes across Boston, people would soon be reading about Blackwood Enterprises, about my family's disgrace, about decades of corruption now exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. I unfolded my own copy with steady hands. The headline sprawled across the front page in bold, unforgiving type. Blackwood Corruption Scandal, Harborfront Project Built on Bribes and Fraud. The accompanying article was meticulous, damning, and comprehensive, detailing a pattern of corruption that stretched back years. The journalists had done their homework. They named names, cited documents, quoted whistleblowers. My father, Alexander, and Victoria featured prominently. There were even grainy photographs of my brother entering the office of a city official now under investigation. My phone began ringing at 6:15. First reporters, then business associates of the family, then distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all seeking comment or inside information. I let most calls go to voicemail, answering only Thomas and Melissa. By 8, I switched on the television to find that news vans had already gathered outside Blackwood Tower downtown, their satellite dishes raised like accusatory fingers pointing at the sky. I watched the coverage from my living room, sipping tea that had gone cold, a strange sense of calm settling over me. This was the storm we had anticipated. Now we would weather it. Blackwood Enterprises released a statement moments ago, announced a somber-faced reporter standing before the gleaming tower that bore our name, acknowledging improprieties in contract procurement and announcing a sweeping corporate restructuring. Walter Blackwood, founder and CEO, is expected to resign by noon today. Sources inside the company indicate that his daughter, Professor Catherine Blackwood, will take a leadership role in the company's reform efforts. Professor Blackwood has been a literature professor at Westfield University for the past 25 years and has not previously been involved in the family business. I turned off the television, not needing to hear my life summarized by strangers. The sound of screeching tires outside drew me to the front window. A silver Mercedes SUV had pulled up to my curb, parked at an odd angle that blocked my neighbor's driveway. Victoria. My doorbell rang with an impatient, repeated pressure. Through the peephole, I saw my sister, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, her cashmere coat unbuttoned against the morning chill. "You've ruined us," she said, as soon as I opened the door. The smell of expensive perfume mingled with alcohol wafted from her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her carefully maintained composure fracturing at the edges. "Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted all along?" "Come in, Victoria." I said quietly. The neighbors don't need to hear this, and you shouldn't be driving in your condition. She stalked into my modest living room, looking around with reflexive disdain despite her distress. Her gaze lingered on the bookshelves that lined the walls, the worn but comfortable furniture, the framed photographs of Melissa through the years. "So this is how the virtuous live," she muttered, trailing her manicured fingers along the spines of my beloved books. "Surrounded by other people's stories instead of writing your own." I ignored the barb. "Would you like some coffee? You look like you could use it." "What I could use is for this nightmare to end," she snapped, but she nodded tersely. I busied myself in the kitchen, giving her a moment to collect herself. When I returned with 2 mugs, she had removed her coat and was sitting rigidly on my couch. "Alexander's lawyer called this morning," she said, accepting the coffee with unsteady hands. "He says Alexander could face jail time. Actual jail time, Catherine." "That depends on his level of involvement," I said, "and his cooperation going forward." "Cooperation?" She laughed bitterly. "You mean confession, surrender, throwing himself at the mercy of some ambitious prosecutor who wants to make a name by taking down the Blackwoods." "I mean taking responsibility," I corrected. "There's dignity in that, Victoria, more than in denial or deflection." She sank deeper into the couch, suddenly deflating. "Easy for you to say. You've got nothing to lose." The echo of Alexander's words from yesterday struck me. "Is that really how you see me? As having nothing?" Victoria looked up, mascara smudged beneath eyes so like our mother's. "You teach literature at a second-rate college. You live in this shoebox. You drive a car that's older than Melissa. Your idea of success is getting students to appreciate Shakespeare for God's sake. And yet here I am, controlling the future of Blackwood Enterprises." I sat across from her. "Maybe your definition of nothing needs reconsidering." She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "Mother left you all that money, all that power, and you never used it. Never even knew about it. Why would she do that?" "I think she was waiting," I said thoughtfully, "for the moment when it would matter most." "And now you're the savior," Victoria said bitterly. "The ethical Blackwood, the one untainted by all the dirty money that paid for your education, your comfortable life, your precious moral high ground." "No," I shook my head. "Just the one who happened to be standing in the right place when it all started falling apart." My phone chimed with a text from Thomas. "Board confirms Walter's resignation received. Press conference at 2 p.m. Your presence requested." I showed Victoria the message. Something shifted in her expression. The reality of our father's capitulation finally sinking in. Walter Blackwood had never surrendered anything in his life. That he would resign his position, his creation, his identity, spoke volumes about the severity of the situation. "What happens to us?" she asked, suddenly sounding like the little sister I barely remembered from childhood, the one who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from nightmares. "To Alexander and me? That depends on you," I said honestly. "The plan includes a path forward for family members who cooperate fully and commit to the new ethical framework. And if we don't, then you'll face the consequences alone." I met her eyes steadily. "I can help you through this, Victoria, but I won't shield you from responsibility." She was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee mug in her hands, watching the dark liquid swirl. "I need to talk to Alexander," she finally said. After she left, I changed into my new suit and drove downtown. The media presence had multiplied. Television cameras, photographers, reporters with microphones poised like weapons. Protesters had gathered as well. Employees worried about their jobs, activists with signs decrying corporate corruption, ordinary citizens expressing their disgust at yet another example of wealthy entitlement. I slipped in through a side entrance where Thomas waited, his weathered face grave but resolute. "The transition team is assembled," he said, guiding me through back corridors. "The board wants you to make a statement at the press conference." "Me? Why?" "You represent continuity and change simultaneously. The Blackwood name without the Blackwood baggage." The press conference felt surreal. Camera flashes, microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting questions as Diane introduced me. I'd spent my career in quiet lecture halls, not media circuses. "Professor Catherine Blackwood will address you regarding the future of Blackwood Enterprises," she announced, stepping aside. I approached the podium, the prepared statement in my hands. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, some hostile, some curious, all intent, I set the paper aside. Today is difficult, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. Difficult for our employees, our partners, and yes, for the Blackwood family. The improprieties revealed in today's news are inexcusable. They represent a betrayal of public trust that cannot be minimized or explained away. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. In the front row, Thomas gave me an encouraging nod. But Blackwood Enterprises is more than the sum of its mistakes. It's the thousands of employees who had no part in these actions. It's the buildings that house businesses, the bridges that connect communities, the developments that revitalize neighborhoods. I paused, making eye contact with several reporters. My father, Walter Blackwood, has resigned as CEO. This is appropriate and necessary. The board has appointed an interim leadership team that I will chair, focused on 3 priorities: complete transparency with investigators, structural reforms to prevent future ethical lapses, and protection of innocent employees and projects. The room erupted with questions. I held up a hand. I joined this company 3 days ago after learning that my mother had quietly secured ownership shares before her death 30 years ago. I'm not here to assign blame or seek revenge. I'm here to ensure that what's worth saving is saved and what needs changing is changed. A reporter called out, "Will criminal charges be filed against your father and siblings?" "That's for prosecutors to determine," I answered. "What I can tell you is that anyone involved will cooperate fully with authorities." Another voice, "What qualifies you to lead this company?" I smiled slightly. 30 years teaching ethics and literature. A lifetime observing the consequences of choices made solely for profit. And perhaps most importantly, the perspective of someone who wasn't in the room when the problematic decisions were made. The questions continued for 20 minutes. When Diane finally ended the session, I felt drained, but oddly exhilarated. In the green room afterward, I found my father watching the coverage on a monitor, his face unreadable. "Not bad," he said, surprising me. "You didn't throw us to the wolves. That was never my intention." He turned to face me. "Your proposal this morning, you were serious?" "Completely. Why would you want my help? I'm toxic now." "Because you know this business," I said, "and because despite everything, you're still my father." Something flickered across his face, perhaps the ghost of emotion long suppressed. "What exactly are you proposing?" "An advisory role, behind the scenes. Help me understand the business while I navigate the ethical reset." He considered this, his businessman's mind visibly calculating angles. "And Alexander and Victoria? That depends on their choices now," I said. "The door is open, but they have to walk through it willingly." Later that afternoon, I found myself in what had been my father's office, now temporarily mine. The city stretched below, the harbor visible in the distance. I traced the skyline, identifying buildings with the Blackwood name attached to them, concrete and steel testaments to my father's vision, however flawed the man himself might be. Melissa called as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the office floor. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Strangely, okay," I answered. "It's overwhelming, but also clarifying." "Mom, I saw your press conference. You were amazing." Her voice held a note of pride that warmed me. "But are you sure about grandfather? After everything he did?" "I'm offering him a chance at redemption," I said. "Whether he takes it is up to him." The first week of the Blackwood transformation was brutal. Prosecutors interviewed key executives daily. We surrendered thousands of documents. The stock price plummeted, then stabilized as investors cautiously approved our transparency approach. I worked 16-hour days, sleeping on the office couch more than once. Alexander surprised me by being the first to truly engage with the new reality. He appeared in my office late one evening, looking haggard but resolute. "I've been going through the harborfront files," he said without preamble. "There's more than the Globe knows." I gestured for him to sit. "Tell me." He laid out additional problems: environmental corners cut, safety inspections falsified, his technical knowledge providing crucial context I lacked. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked when he'd finished. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Because you were right, about everything, and because," he hesitated, "I'm tired of being afraid of what might be discovered next." "Fear is exhausting," I agreed. "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Face all this without flinching?" I considered the question. I spent decades teaching students about characters who confront moral crises. How could I do less when faced with my own? He nodded slowly. "Victoria's still in denial. She thinks this will all blow over." It won't, I said gently. The sooner she accepts that, the better. The following morning, Thomas brought unexpected news. The mayor's office was considering canceling all Blackwood contracts, including the Harborfront project. That would be devastating, I said. Not just for us, but for the city. The project is nearly 60% complete. They're worried about the optics, Thomas explained, being associated with corruption. I spent the afternoon strategizing with Diane and the board. By evening, we had crafted a bold proposal: the creation of an independent oversight committee with community representation to monitor the project's completion. We would also establish a community benefit fund using a percentage of the project's profits. It's unprecedented, Diane admitted, but it might work. As I was leaving the office that night, I found my father waiting by the elevator. He handed me a thick folder. "What's this?" I asked. "Everything I know about our competitors, our advantages, our weaknesses," he replied. "Things that don't appear in any company document." I took the folder, sensing its importance. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said grimly. "Page 37 details our relationship with Councilman Prescott. You'll need to address it before the prosecutors find it." I nodded, appreciating both the information and the warning. "I will." As the elevator doors opened, he hesitated, then said, "You're doing better than I would have, in your position." From Walter Blackwood, it was the closest thing to praise I'd ever received. The mayor's office was a study in political caution. Thick carpets muffled sound, dark wood paneling absorbed light, and the careful arrangement of historical photographs suggested a deliberate connection to Boston's more venerable past, not its complicated present. "Professor Blackwood," Mayor Fitzgerald greeted me with a politician's practiced handshake. "An unusual situation we find ourselves in." "Indeed," I replied, taking the offered seat. Thomas sat beside me, while Diane and 2 board members completed our delegation. Across the polished conference table, the mayor's team, chief of staff, city attorney, and the director of urban development formed a united front. "Let me be direct," Fitzgerald continued. "The city cannot maintain contractual relationships with an entity under federal investigation for bribing public officials. The political cost is too high." "I understand your position," I said, "but canceling the contracts would harm thousands of workers and leave the waterfront half-developed for years." "That's unfortunate, but it's also unnecessary," I interjected, opening my presentation folder. "We've developed an alternative that protects the city while allowing the projects to continue." For the next hour, we outlined our proposal: an independent oversight committee with significant city and community representation, complete financial transparency, and the establishment of a $10 million community benefit fund. The community benefit fund would support affordable housing, public spaces, and job training for local residents, I explained. And we're prepared to accept reduced profit margins to ensure it's properly funded. The mayor leaned back, fingers steepled. "It's an interesting proposal, but why should the city trust Blackwood Enterprises now?" "Because we're not the same company," I said simply. "Different leadership, different values, different priorities. And because we're the only ones positioned to finish what's been started without years of delay and litigation." The urban development director nodded reluctantly. "She has a point. Rebidding these projects would set us back at least 3 years. After 2 more meetings and countless revisions, we reached an agreement. The Harborfront project would continue under stringent oversight. The mayor got his political cover, and we preserved thousands of jobs." Walking back to Blackwood Tower afterward, Thomas smiled for the first time in days. "Eleanor would be proud," he said. "You negotiated like a seasoned executive while keeping your principles intact." "I had good teachers," I replied, "in literature and in life." Back at the office, I found Victoria waiting in my temporary headquarters. Her usual polished appearance had returned, but something was different. A new sobriety in her eyes, perhaps. "Alexander told me about your meeting with the mayor," she said. "He says you saved the Harborfront project." "We saved it," I corrected. "It was a team effort." She wandered to the window, looking out at the city. "I've been thinking about what you said, about taking responsibility. And I've decided to cooperate fully with the investigation," she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I've instructed my attorneys to reach out to the prosecutors." The admission clearly cost her. Victoria's entire identity had been built around being the flawless, ruthless Blackwood daughter. "That's a brave decision," I said. She turned, a flash of her old defiance returning. I'm not doing it to be brave. I'm doing it because it's pragmatic. Alexander showed me the evidence they have. Fighting would only make it worse. Pragmatism and ethics often align, I observed. Whatever your reasons, it's the right choice. She studied me with new eyes. You're not what I expected, Catherine. What did you expect? Vengeance, gloating. Instead, you're... She hesitated, searching for the word, rebuilding. That was always the plan, I said. Mother's plan. The transformation of Blackwood Enterprises continued at a remarkable pace over the following weeks. The ethics committee took shape, with respected academics and former regulators accepting appointments. We hired a chief compliance officer with a sterling reputation. The stock price began a tentative recovery as the market responded to our transparency approach. Not everything went smoothly. Several executives resigned rather than face the new scrutiny. A major investor threatened to pull out until our one-on-one meeting convinced him of our viability. The prosecutors continued their methodical work, with Alexander and Victoria both signing cooperation agreements that would likely keep them from serving prison time. My father operated from the shadows, his knowledge proving invaluable. Each morning, I would find notes on my desk, insights about particular projects, warnings about potential problems, suggestions for navigating complex relationships with long-standing clients. We established a rhythm, formal but functional, professional but increasingly candid. 6 weeks into the transition, I received a call from the dean of my university. They had been patient with my extended leave of absence, but decisions needed to be made about the upcoming semester. We need to know if you're planning to return to teaching, Catherine, he said gently. The department needs to plan. I glanced around the executive office I'd reluctantly grown accustomed to, feeling the pull of two very different worlds. I need a little more time, I answered, surprising myself. Can you give me another month? That evening, Melissa joined me for dinner at a small Italian restaurant we'd frequented since her college days. Away from the pressure and politics of Blackwood Tower, I felt myself exhaling fully for the first time in weeks. The dean called today, I told her, twirling pasta around my fork. They need to know if I'm coming back. And are you? She asked, studying me over her wine glass. I don't know, I admitted. 6 weeks ago, the answer would have been an immediate yes. Now you're running a major corporation, she finished, and apparently doing it well. Temporarily, I emphasized, until the crisis passes. Mom, Melissa said gently, I don't think this is a temporary situation anymore. The board is thrilled with your leadership. The employees respect you. Even grandfather acknowledges you're the right person for the job. But I'm a literature professor, I protested, not a CEO. Maybe you're both, she suggested. Maybe this is what grandmother saw in you all along. Later that night, I found myself unable to sleep. I pulled out my mother's letter again, reading it by the soft light of my bedside lamp. One passage jumped out at me that I hadn't fully absorbed before. The divide between art and commerce, between humanities and business, is largely artificial, Catherine. The same keen insight that helps you interpret Austen or Shakespeare can illuminate boardroom dynamics and corporate ethics. Don't let anyone, especially your father, convince you that your gifts have no place in his world. They are precisely what his world most desperately needs. I fell asleep with the letter on my chest, dreaming of my mother walking the halls of Blackwood Tower, smiling at what she saw. 3 months after the scandal broke, snow blanketed Boston in pristine white. From my office window, I could see workers in bright safety vests moving against the snow at the harborfront project site, floodlights illuminating their progress even as winter shortened the days. Their livelihoods, once imperiled by my family's hubris, now continued uninterrupted, a small victory in a season of difficult compromises. The Blackwood restoration plan had progressed with surprising momentum. Alexander had accepted a plea deal that included community service and a significant fine but no jail time, in exchange for his complete cooperation. He now worked with industry ethics groups, sharing insights on how corruption infiltrates corporate culture, finding, perhaps for the first time, a purpose beyond profit margins and quarterly returns. Victoria had proven unexpectedly valuable in restructuring the company's community relations, her social connections repurposed for rebuilding trust rather than leveraging influence. Her transformation wasn't dramatic. She still maintained her designer wardrobe and country club memberships, but there was a new authenticity to her engagement with the world beyond status and acquisition. My father's journey was more complicated. Publicly disgraced, privately humbled, he oscillated between resistance and resignation. Our weekly advisory meetings often became tense, his old imperious manner flaring before subsiding into grudging respect. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, he was changing, asking questions instead of issuing pronouncements, considering consequences beyond balance sheets. The ethics committee approved the new procurement protocols, I told him during one such meeting, snow falling gently outside. Unanimous vote. He nodded, reviewing the document with reading glasses he'd once been too vain to wear in public. Solid framework, though Section 4 needs clarification on vendor relationships. Already noted, I said. We're addressing it next week. He set down the papers, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Your mother kept a journal, he said abruptly. Did you know that? I shook my head, surprised by the shift. Found it while clearing out the safe at home. He hesitated. She wrote about you often. Your independence, your integrity. She saw it early, who you would become. The admission hung in the air between us, more significant than it might appear to an outsider. Walter Blackwood did not easily acknowledge being wrong. I'd like to read it sometime, I said carefully. I'll have it sent over. He rose to leave, then paused. The Eleanor Blackwood Community Center proposal, the one in the old files. Were you serious about reviving it? Yes, I said. We break ground in spring. Something softened in his face. Not quite a smile, but a lessening of the hardness that had defined him for so long. The university had granted me an extended sabbatical after realizing that my leadership at Blackwood represented a unique opportunity for their business ethics program. We'd established an internship where selected students could observe corporate rehabilitation firsthand. It was an elegant solution to my divided loyalties, though I still managed to guest lecture occasionally, keeping one foot in the academic world I loved. The company Christmas party was held at the Art Museum, deliberately modest compared to previous years' extravaganzas. I stood at the edge of the gathering, watching employees and their families enjoying the evening, their initial wariness of the new regime gradually giving way to cautious optimism. Melissa found me by the Renaissance paintings, champagne flute in hand. You've done something remarkable, Mom, she said, nodding toward the crowd. They're not just relieved to have jobs, they're proud again. It's still fragile, I cautioned. We have a long way to go. But you've started, she insisted. That's what matters. Across the room, I spotted my father in conversation with Diane and several board members. He caught my eye and lifted his glass slightly, a subtle acknowledgement. Did I ever tell you about the book I was teaching the day your grandmother's letter found me? I asked Melissa suddenly. She shook her head. The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare's story of loss, redemption, and unexpected second chances. I smiled at the memory. I've taught it dozens of times, but never truly understood its power until now. Later that evening, I visited the company archive, a climate-controlled room in the basement where Blackwood Enterprises' history was meticulously preserved. Among the blueprints and photographs, I found what I was seeking: the original incorporation documents, my mother's signature beside my father's, her contribution obscured but essential from the very beginning. I traced her elegant handwriting with my fingertip, feeling a connection across decades. We did it, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. We're reclaiming your vision. Spring arrived with unexpected gentleness. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Eleanor Blackwood Community Center drew a modest crowd. Employees, neighbors, city officials cautiously embracing the company's new direction. I stood at the podium, sunlight warm on my shoulders, my father seated nearby with Alexander and Victoria, flanking him like bookends. Melissa stood in the front row, her face shining with quiet pride. This center represents more than a building, I said, my voice carrying across the gathered faces. It embodies a commitment to values that transcend profit margins: knowledge, community, accessibility, and truth. As I pressed the ceremonial shovel into the soil, I felt something shift into place, not an ending, but a continuation. The Blackwood legacy reconceived not as towers of glass and steel, but as spaces where people could gather, learn, and grow. The board had recently approached me about removing the interim from my CEO title. I'd asked for time to consider, though Melissa had simply smiled knowingly when I told her. Some choices make themselves, she'd said, That evening, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was peaceful in the gathering twilight, birds calling softly from newly budding trees. I placed white roses, her favorite, against the simple headstone. "You saw so far ahead," I said quietly. "You planted seeds knowing you wouldn't see them flower." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around me, carrying the scent of earth awakening after winter's sleep. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what my mother had known all along. True legacy isn't built in steel and concrete or measured in dollars and cents. It lives in the choices we make, the truths we honor, and the bridges we build across the chasms that divide us. Some fortunes are counted in buildings, others in broken cycles, mended relationships, and reclaimed dignity. The wealthiest inheritance, I realized as I walked back through the lengthening shadows, is the courage to stand firm when the world demands you bend. 5 years later, autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Eleanor Blackwood Library, casting warm rectangles across the polished oak tables where a dozen teenagers hunched over books and laptops. I paused in the doorway, savoring the quiet rustle of pages turning and the occasional whispered consultation. This had been my mother's dream, a space where knowledge was valued above wealth, where ideas flourished freely. "Quarterly reports are ready for your review, Ms. Blackwood," my assistant said quietly, handing me a slim folder embossed with the new Blackwood Enterprises logo, the original angular design now softened with an open book motif that symbolized our commitment to transparency. "Thank you, Daniel. I'll review them this afternoon." 5 years had transformed both the company and our family in ways I never could have imagined that fateful night when I first opened my mother's letter. Blackwood Enterprises had emerged from its corruption scandal not merely rehabilitated, but reimagined. Smaller in some ways, more substantial in others. We'd divested from projects built on questionable foundations and invested heavily in sustainable development and community-centered initiatives. Our profit margins were slimmer, but our ethical footprint was robust. The Eleanor Blackwood Community Foundation now occupied the entire first floor of Blackwood Tower, its mission extending far beyond the initial library. Educational programs, affordable housing initiatives, and arts endowments flourished under its umbrella, all guided by the principles my mother had valued. I crossed the library to my favorite spot, a bay window overlooking the harbor where the once controversial harborfront project now stood completed. The complex included not just luxury condominiums and upscale retail spaces, but also affordable housing, public parkland, and a vocational training center. It had become a template for ethical urban development nationwide. "I thought I'd find you here," said a familiar voice. My father stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane that was now a necessity rather than an affectation. At 85, Walter Blackwood had mellowed in ways none of us could have predicted. The legal consequences of his actions had included significant financial penalties and a suspended sentence, but the true punishment had been the public disgrace. Yet from that disgrace had come an unexpected redemption. "Just checking on things before the board meeting," I said as he joined me at the window. "Melissa called. She's running late, some emergency at the clinic." My daughter had established a public health center in one of Boston's underserved neighborhoods, applying her medical expertise to communities that needed it most. She'd recently been appointed to the city's health commission, a role that filled her with purpose and occasionally made her late for family gatherings. Alexander texted, too. The ethics seminar in Chicago ran long. My brother had transformed his experience into something constructive, becoming a sought-after speaker on corporate ethics and compliance. His genuine remorse and commitment to reform had gradually earned him respect in circles where the Blackwood name had once been synonymous with corruption. "And Victoria?" I asked, already at the restaurant with her family. My sister had perhaps undergone the most surprising transformation. After a period of intense rebellion against the new order, she had eventually found her place managing the Foundation's international initiatives, her social connections repurposed for fundraising and awareness. My father gazed out at the harbor, his profile still proud but softened by time and humility. "I was looking at the quarterly numbers this morning," he said. "We're still not where we were before." "No," I agreed. "We're somewhere better." He nodded slowly. "Eleanor always said that there were measurements beyond money. A small smile crossed his face. I never understood what she meant until now. We stood in companionable silence, watching sailboats cut white paths across the blue harbor. 5 years ago, such a moment would have been unimaginable. The literature professor and the disgraced tycoon finding common ground in a shared legacy. "Ready for dinner?" he asked finally. "It's not often we get everyone together these days." "Just one more thing to check," I said, leading him to a corner of the library where a glass case displayed artifacts from Blackwood history. Among them lay my mother's letter, carefully preserved, its yellowed pages a testament to her foresight and wisdom. Beside it rested a new edition, the first edition of my book, The Unexpected Inheritance, Ethics, Business, and Family Legacy. It had grown from a sabbatical project into something more significant, part memoir, part business ethics treatise, part exploration of how literature's moral frameworks could inform corporate governance. My father studied the display, then turned to me with a rare expression of naked emotion. "She would be proud of you, Catherine, of what you've built from what was broken." "Of what we've all built," I corrected gently, taking his arm as we walked toward the elevator. Some inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in the courage to reimagine what's possible. As we stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, I glanced back at the building where my mother's name now shone in elegant copper letters. The true fortune, I had learned, wasn't in the accounts she had secretly established or the shares she had quietly purchased. It was in the values she had planted, seeds that had waited patiently for the right season to bloom. Sometimes the most valuable legacy isn't what we accumulate, but what we dare to transform. And sometimes the most unexpected inheritance is the chance to become who we were always meant to be.